What's up, my fellow emo, pop, punk, metalcore music lovers? Matrix here, and you are locked into the Matrix Music Review Podcast, the only place to get your alt-rock music fix. We are back with our final roundup of all of the albums that have been missed in the past couple of weeks. This has been a lot of fun, but it has been a lot. I'm going to be honest, this has been a lot to get all these out. I hope we never have another 3-week stretch of music releases like this again, because this has been absolutely brutal. But this is what I love doing, so I'm going to keep doing it for you guys, and I know you guys enjoy it as well, just as much as I do. As always, all the links to everything you need from me are in the description of this episode. Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, all that fun stuff is down below. Make sure you're following me on all those social media platforms. If you're listening on Apple Music or Spotify, go ahead and leave a 5-star review. Help boost our visibility to other people. And the best way that you can boost our visibility is by sharing this podcast with friends, family, coworkers, whoever that you know in your life that needs a new podcast, likes alternative music, or that you want to get into alternative music. Send this podcast their way. Help us grow our little community of alt-rock music lovers. With that, we're jumping right into our album reviews, and the first one is I Want to Disappear by The Story So Far. This is the 5th album from The Story So Far, and The Story So Far is a band that I continue to say is extremely underrated and extremely underappreciated in the scene. I think that a lot of what they do is very good, and I think it goes unrecognized a lot of the times. I think this is their first album since 2018 when they released Proper Dose, which happened to be one of my favorite albums in a very long time. But this is a very similar album to that, and this is really the way that I consider the state of pop punk and the way that it should be. You know, the Story So Far, the Knuckle Pucks, the Real Friends, the Mayday Parades when they're doing things correctly, because I wasn't a huge fan of that most recent single that they just released. But when these types of bands are on their A game, that is exactly where the state of pop punk needs to stay, because I think that's when it's at its best. Jump the Gun is a song that really stood out on first or second listen to me, because this song is all about how you're neglecting what you have at home, and you're neglecting what you don't want to lose, but you also don't want to jump the gun and go to something which you think is better just because it seems better at the time. But the real theme of this album is loss, and this is an extremely emotional album to listen to when you pick up that is the theme, and when you really listen to what a lot of these songs are about. And I think that's why this was such an interesting album to listen to, because a lot of times I think pop punk gets a bad rap, because a lot of times people think that there's not a whole lot of emotion behind what people are saying, even though the emo genre is extremely emotional. But when you listen to an album like this, and you get a song like Keep You Around is a song that's all about this depression feeling of loss, and everybody has that depression feeling that they get when they lose a loved one or lose someone in their life, and you feel like you need to be that person that's strong for everybody else. But in this sense, you're not helping the others. And how are you going to cover yourself when you just want to cover yourself in the shade of where you spread that person's ashes? And these are actual lines from this track. It's just a deeper way of thinking, and it's a deeper way to look at loss, and it's kind of masked by sometimes up-tempo, what sounds like happy beats, and that's not always the case, right? Like, that is something that's so unique about this particular album, is that you will get up-tempo tracks musically, and then when you listen to the lyrics, you're like, oh my God, this is some of the most emotional, depressing stuff that has been talked about, but it doesn't seem like it. It seems like everything's fine. And I think that's something that is really interesting, because I think that's a theme about this album too, is that a lot of times people just seem fine and seem like everything's going okay. They have that up-tempo personality, upbeat personality about them. But on the inside, it's just this emotional feeling that's just not always shining through. But there is some acoustic nature to this album as well on a song like White Shores, which kind of drives home that emotional feeling and those feelings of loss that come all throughout this album. And the title track is just, I mean, there's no other way to describe it than it's just beautiful. I think it really hits that feeling of not wanting to be around after something tragic happens and just wanting to disappear from the world for a little bit. Overall, this was a fantastic album. Sometimes with emotional, like very focused on one specific thing albums, it's hard to connect a whole lot, but with this one I didn't have any trouble with that, and I don't think anybody else will either. I think it's very clear to see what the story so far was going through when they were writing this album, and just how this album can be so impactful for other people that are out in the world. So this album's going to get a 9.3 out of 10 for me. It was one of my favorites that I've listened to so far this year, especially in terms of subject material. So if you haven't heard it yet, go check out I Want to Disappear by The Story So Far. Next up is Aftertaste by Hey Violet. This is the second album from Hey Violet, and this falls in the pop rock side of this alternative genre. And it's got a little bit of a Honey Revenge sound to it, but to me, the comparison, for some reason, vocally goes straight to Ashley Simpson, and I'm not really sure where I'm getting that from, but listen to this album and let me know if you feel the same way. I love the meaning of a song like Best Imposter. It really hits home because it's a song that's all about how people can mistake you for being just this lucky person that you haven't really had to work too hard for anything, and you haven't really had much that you've had to struggle for, that everything's just coming so naturally to you. But really, the only obstacle that you faced is yourself, because you have so many things that you have to overcome in order to make these things happen, that on the outside, it looks easy to other people, but on the inside for you, it's the hardest thing that you've ever had to do. And that's something that I can definitely relate to. You know, people may look at you and say like, oh, it's just so easy to be you. It's so easy to do what you have to do. You don't have anything that causes you any amounts of problems. And that's just not the case. Everybody's got their own shit. Everybody's got their own stuff that's going on, and nothing's ever easy for anybody. So you don't want to just be this best imposter. Relatability is something that hit home a lot on this album for me. A song like I Should Call My Friends definitely stood out, because I think we all talk about how much we want to grow up. And even though we are all grown up, and, you know, a lot of us may be happy with where we're at today, I don't think it's hard to sit here and say that we may all really want to be somewhere where, whether it's college or high school or, you know, hell, even elementary school, whatever time it was in your life where things were simpler and your friends were closer and you felt like you just had that support all the time. I know for me, that time is college. Like going back to college where you had those same 5, 10, 12 people that you were just super close to and you were with all the time, and that became family. It would be great. You know, now everybody's scattered across the country or even internationally, and it's harder to get together with everybody. You do miss those times where it was just so simple to like walk into a room and have those people that you cared about, and sometimes you just want to go there. And there's such subtle production points that are added to the title track Aftertaste that make it such a cool track to listen to, and just try and, you know, pick up on some of those little subtle production pieces that may not be picked up very often. Overall, I think this is a really good album. I think this is an 8 out of 10 for me. I don't think that there's anything wrong with this album at all. I think it's very fun, and I think if you are somebody that enjoys pop rock and doesn't always like the angst of the pop punk scene, this is an album that you're really going to enjoy. So if you haven't heard it yet, go check it out. Aftertaste by Hey Violet. Next up is Hot Singles in Your Area by Scene Queen. This is the debut album, and I've seen things say that it's bimbo core, whatever you want to call this specific subgenre. And this is potentially the most interesting review that you will hear me do this year because I had a blast with this album. I don't think anybody would expect me to say that for some reason. I don't know that it's kind of like 100 Gex for me last year. I don't know necessarily why I like it so much, but this is creativity at its best, and I think this is where later in the review I'll get into, the misunderstanding of this type of music, but this is where people really can show their creativity when they just don't give a fuck and they just do what they want. And that's exactly what was done on this album here, and I loved it. 18 Plus starts off with this great commentary of, for lack of better words, the bullshit that really does exist not only in the music industry, but just in the world in general. I think a lot of times people get caught up in that Warped Tour time and forget that there was some shady shit that went on, where people were getting invited on the tour buses and they weren't 18 plus. Nobody was of legal age and they were getting invited on the buses and to do different things. And that's just a little sketchy. And I think that's something that stood out, is that this album has some of the most unique lines that you will hear all year long. And what makes it even better is that they're all fucking catchy. That's what makes this album so impressive, is that it just has that ability to make a catchy hook or a catchy line, and you find yourself singing it and you're like, oh fuck, maybe I shouldn't be singing a song like this. Specifically, a song like Mutual Masturbation, where there's a line that says, all the circle jerks get in formation. Like, yeah, probably shouldn't be singing that one in public anytime soon because you're going to get some weird looks, but it's hard not to. The title track has this very weird break about 25 seconds in that just stood out to me. It's a different guitar break that I really enjoyed. But getting onto kind of what this album is that this album is going to be very misunderstood by a lot of people. And I think that's unfortunate because there is such artistry behind what Scene Queen did on this album and what Scene Queen does in general. The artistry and the ability to just say whatever you want, do whatever you want, and actually make a connection with a lot of fans out there is so impressive. And I'm sure there's going to be the classic critics that listen to this album and are like, this is absolute bullshit. This is terrible. This is not what music is supposed to be. Really, let it go. Music can be whatever the fuck you want it to be. If you don't like it, don't listen to it. For me personally, this is a great album. This is a great time. This is absolute fantastic lyricism and artistry. And if you're one of my younger listeners, maybe just don't listen with your parents in the room, okay? This is a really fun album. I think everybody's going to enjoy it. Just maybe screen where you're listening to it so you don't get yourself in trouble. And what I mean by that is Finger might be one of the catchiest vibes of the year, with just absolutely wild lines all throughout that I found myself singing as I'm walking around work, and I'm like, oh, maybe I should not sing that song here, but it's hard because it's so catchy and it's so good. Another track that stood out was Oral Fixation. The guitar intro on that is amazing, and then there's a different flow to the vocal delivery there that is done so well that it's hard not to really appreciate Scene Queen in that flow respect. Overall, this was a crazy, fun, interesting, strange ride that I went through on this entire album, but it was one of the best albums that I've heard all year. And I mean, going in, I wasn't sure what to expect, but that's why you go into albums with an open mind. You don't go in with this preconceived notion of, oh God, I saw all the titles of the tracks and they look like they're just going to be this raunchy mess, because that's not the case. If you actually listen to it and listen to what the artist is saying, there is a lot of substance behind what's being said. And this album's getting a 9 out of 10 for me. This was a lot of fun to listen to. If you haven't heard it yet, go check out Hot Singles in Your Area by Scene Queen. Next up is Hell or High Water by Nothing Nowhere. Nothing Nowhere is one of the most interesting artists, not just in this alternative music scene, but in all of music at this point in time. Because you never know quite what you're going to get from an artist like Nothing Nowhere from album to album or even from song to song. This album, I feel like he's an emo cowboy. I feel like that's basically what we got here. Like, In the Country is where it really stood out that this was something a little different that we probably haven't heard before. I didn't know that we were going to potentially have this new subgenre. I feel like we always come up with new subgenres. Speed just introduced us to flutecore. Well, Nothing Nowhere just got us into harmonica core because In the Country has harmonica on it that is fantastic. And it's on other songs as well. And the production on all of these tracks is something that really stood out. You know, we have really special production on Cliche Lovers, which gives this ethereal feeling, and you can really feel what's going on in a song like Cliche Lovers. You know, we get more harmonica on a song like Honey, and you even get like some trap beats in there or hip hop beats in there. And this album isn't afraid to take chances, but also stay within itself. You know, there's some chances that are taken with production. There's some chances taken with lyricism, but at the end of the day, you don't come out feeling like Nothing Nowhere experimented completely, where there's just a song that feels so out of place that you could tell that that's what it was. And I feel like we got a little bit of that experimentation on a track like Rodeo Clown, where we got this steel guitar, and I really had to like stop and catch myself because I used to be a country music reviewer. I know what a steel guitar sounds like, but I haven't listened to that shit in a long time. So I was like, is that what I heard? And yeah, it's what I'm pretty sure that's what I heard. And for an album that only has 9 tracks, they all pack a punch. And it's kind of as close to a perfect album as you can get. I'm not ready to call this a perfect album yet. I haven't spent enough time with it, even though it was in that 3-week span where we had a lot of music. It's definitely one that I felt myself gravitating towards. And so this is going to get a 9.4 out of 10. And this is an album that I'm really looking forward to spending more time with as the year goes on. And the last album that we're going to talk about is Carnal by Nothing More. This is the 5th album from the hard rock band, and this is one that kind of feels even worse than my Wage War review because I got nothing, guys. I really don't. This is an album that I liked, but I really didn't love it. It was very much on that octane core side of things that I talked about in an earlier podcast. And I think when we talk about octane core, I think one of the stipulations that needs to be said is if that's what you're looking for, then this is a great album for you. And I'm totally fine with that. For me, I'm looking for something that has more substance to it. Unfortunately, I didn't get that here. I did not get the heavy piece that I was looking for. And I can always tell when I'm listening to an album if I'm enjoying it or if it's something that, you know, I'm definitely going to come back to, because about halfway through, I either am still completely locked in or I've tuned out completely and my mind starts to wander and I start doing other things, or I put it on when I'm doing something around the house. And that's exactly what happened with this Nothing More album. It is one that it didn't hold my attention. It didn't have anything interesting about it that stood out. So it's going to be a 6.5 out of 10 for me. Like I said, if this hard rock octane core sound is something that you really are looking for, this is perfect. I think you'll really enjoy it. But for me, it's just not what I was looking for at this time. So I'm just going to leave it where it is. But go check out Carnal by Nothing More and let me know what you guys think. We did it. We made it through all the albums that I wanted to talk about over the past couple of weeks. I know that that's a lot for you guys to digest and a lot for you guys to pay attention to, but it leads right into our mid-year, what's our best album? What's the best music that we've heard so far this year? What's the best tour that I've been to? And I'm really excited to put that podcast out for you guys. It's coming very, very soon. But to give you guys a sneak peek, one of the things that I do, and I'm sure that you guys know this by now, is that I write down all of my scripts before I come in to record for a podcast so that I'm not just up here babbling like an idiot for an hour. But I started to script out my mid-year tier list and kind of who had the best album so far this year. And, I thought I was kind of pretty set on where I was going with things and where I was, probably going to change a little bit, or if anything needed to change a little bit. And this past week, we had a new album from the home team, and it shot everything to shit. I mean, there is no other way to describe it other than it fucked everything up, because that album from the home team is just spectacular. And I knew it. I should have known better than to try and do a mid-year tier list the week that the home team drops a new album. But damn, that album was absolutely out of this world. That's going to be the next review podcast that you guys get. It's going to be the home team, Cassidy Pope, and all those types of albums that came out this past week. But I was so blown away by that album that it's got to be included in the mid-year list, which is unprecedented for me to talk about an album in a mid-year list that I haven't even put out a full review on yet. So bear with me when you hear me talk about that album, and just know that you'll get that as the very next podcast, which should be very soon. But that's your little intro into what to expect for the album of the year list. I'm sure the questions are going to be asked: where does Bring Me the Horizon fall? Where does Imminence fall? And where do other albums that I've talked about this year? I've given out a couple of 10 out of 10s. So it's going to be interesting to see where everybody falls in the middle of the year, and then again at the end of the year, because we still have a ton of great music coming out from a lot of really good artists. So looking forward to the rest of this year. But that wraps it up for us here on Matrix Music Review. I hope everybody enjoyed. Make sure you are following along on Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok, as well as the Control-Alt-Save playlist. That's continuously getting updated with all new tracks and songs from albums that I've been talking about on this podcast. That's where you can stay up to date on everything that I'm listening to. But I will see you guys very soon with that mid-year tier list, and I can't wait to see what you guys think of it. See you then.